That's easy enough.
If you can do it
Sure.
quickly. Oh, we're back. At this time, we're going to continue the conversation about the Countdown 2000. We have two astrologers that are a member of the Astrological Society of Connecticut, Jacqueline Lindley Janes and Don Serow. And they both have different perspectives about what's going on in terms of the world and in terms of our movement to the new century. So I'm going to begin with Jacqueline. I know that Jacqueline is a counseling astrologer, and if you could just sort of talk briefly about yourself, how you approach your work, and also your feelings about what's going on. I mean, what's happening out here?
Well, my practice, I'm both a consultant and also an astrological counselor, which means that some clients come to me for brief or extended therapy. I have a master's degree in counseling, and I also have passed the NCGR Level 4 exams for a certified counseling astrologer.
You probably need to explain that.
Well,
just
the
quickly.
Right, the NCGR is an international organization of astrologers, and they do have an exam system that allows astrologers to take a 4-level exam testing that measures how well and what you know in your field. It's not necessary for an astrologer to have that certification. I started it a long time ago and just continue to work with it. I think particularly because I was interested in the counseling approach to astrology. Mainly, people come to me because they have issues and they want a new approach.
Okay.
And astrology can be used for that in terms of helping a person get a different idea about what their energy patterns are, where the blocks might be, where the challenges might be in their life. And also, astrology is a wonderful tool for a therapist because it does enable the therapist to know a lot about the client very quickly and very soon, so that a lot of clients feel that a lot of the work that usually goes on between a counselor and a therapist is really cut in half because the counselor is brought up to speed, not necessarily the client, but the counselor is brought up to speed very quickly. One of my concerns, well, I have several concerns as we move into the new millennium. And as I was thinking about this evening, I thought, well, what the changes were as we moved into this last century, and many of the changes have to do with communication and making our world smaller. And we really are moving into a global community. And that means that we have to work at issues around race, around ethnicity, around gender, also sexual identity. We just had a Supreme Court case today that now says that discrimination can be also based on harassment between male to male or female to female, and that occurred today. And that's a tremendous step in terms of encompassing all the possibilities of discrimination. Another concern that is for moving into the new millennium that has already started is our economics, because internationally there's our country, our developed country, uses many more of the resources of the world, and we need to level that out. And I think Don perhaps is going to talk a little bit more about that.
Okay.
Also, another area, obviously, when we talk about economic resources, is how we treat our Mother Earth and the earth pollution, the toxicity, how we are being stewards of the earth.
Right.
And that's a primary concern. And I believe also, speaking a little astrology, that a lot of those concerns are really at the forepoint of the Uranus conjunct Neptune in 1993. We can no longer put that on the back burner or think that it was just a nice idea.
Okay.
Mother Earth is crying out for some attention. Also, one of the areas that I'm very interested in is the area of spirituality. And one of the things that I see, again speaking astrology, because we've moved in the Pluto, the planetary energy that talks about transformation, is now in the sign of Sagittarius. Pluto moved into Sagittarius in January of '95. And also, during this segment of the 90s, Uranus has moved into Aquarius, Neptune has moved into Aquarius. These, what are called transpersonal planets, are suggesting that we have to look at our attitudes in many areas. And in terms of spirituality, some of the institutions and structures that have been the containers for spirituality on our planet are no longer satisfying the needs of humanity. So there has to be some new attitudes.
I hear you. I hear you.
And part of what I see as my role as an astrological counselor is to bring these more esoteric concerns, these more abstract concerns, down to an everyday level.
Okay. I think this is a really good way for us to segue into Dawn's work. I have always been very impressed with your way of approaching astrology, the historical perspective. And
thank you, Zee.
I think that you might want to just sort of introduce yourself and give just some comments about yourself and how you approach astrology, and then tell us about your understanding of what's going on.
Well, my name's Don Serow. I'm the author of Athena's Web, which appeared in the Advocate newspapers from 1984 until 1992. So some New Haven folk might have been aware of that. But I've always looked at the larger perspective. My background is I went to UMass and studied astrology in the ancient world. And so I've been an astrologer of 25 years. And I am a full-time astrologer. That's what I do. Where it is that we currently stand is that we are at the end of an age. This is the end of a larger social swath of time, a continuous piece of culture, as it were. It began really with, in the Western world, with Christ 2,000 years ago, and each of the ages last for a little over 2,000 years. So we now stand at the other end of that period of time. And if we look back into time, each of the ages have come to completion with some sort of social disintegration. The third eye features quite a bit the pyramids and the old kingdom of Egypt. Well, about 500 years after the pyramids were built, that old kingdom began to disintegrate. Circumstances began to deteriorate. The social fiber which held it together evaporated, so that their claim on eternity, the whole process of mummification and everything, and burying bodies that were meant to last forever, began to fall apart. And you began to see grave robberies and people trying to plunder the wealth, etc., that was there. There's a loss of power. There's nobody, Pharaoh no longer has their power. If you jump down to the next age, the age of Taurus, which is, by the way, the end of Taurus was about 2400 to 2200 BC. If you jump down to the end of the age of Aries, we're looking at the time just before the Roman Republic. And once again, the social state enters a period of anarchy where one Roman army is vying with another for power and control. Well, we currently stand at the end of the age of Pisces. And once again, we're beginning to see some of the epics of social disintegration appearing. Currently, as we speak, half of California is being declared a disaster zone. A good chunk of southern Florida is in the same state. And this is things that really since the 60s, astrologers have been talking about the epoch that was coming. It's not, on the one hand, a pretty picture because of what's going on. On the other hand, what's disintegrating are a lot of the old systems. A lot of the design of differentiation, of class hierarchy, one over the other, and it's not holding up in the way that it was. This is what's beginning to go. And what will be born out of this whole process is a new period of equality, of people relating not only one to each other as human beings, but also to the earth, to the environment, to the other kingdoms, the animal, the mineral kingdom, etc. And this is going to be one of the main differences that we're looking at upcoming as we approach what the fifth dimension so well popularized as the dawning of the age of Aquarius.
Okay, okay, okay.
So that's a very broad look at where it is that we are and why we're seeing some of the craziness going on out there in the world.
Has it been predicted, like in the, a lot of people are looking at the Bible, they're looking at ancient you could say texts as a way of saying, okay, it's here, I see it here, and it's happening. Can you sort of speak to that?
Absolutely.
Because I know that you have had experience in looking at this.
I'm glad you asked.
It's like, okay.
A number of the myths around the world have all featured into that this period of time seems to end with some sort of cataclysm. The Bible certainly, in Matthew 24 and Mark 13, and indeed the entire book of Revelations, talks about the process that will happen. And it basically typifies it by saying, be alert, be ready. One does not know when the master will return. And if you knew what time somebody was going to burst into your house, of course you'd stand watch.
Okay.
But this will be a time when people and society as a whole have forgotten. So the point is to pay attention. Norse tradition talks about a huge final battle where the gods do battle with the world serpent. In Indian tradition, there's the 10th incarnation of Vishnu, I believe, would come in as Kali.
Exactly.
And that would be a period of ultimate destruction and some difficulty for folks. If you look to the Greek tradition, the fifth, I believe it is, labor of Hercules, which is the one that would correspond to our current age, is the cleaning of the stables. And I hope I can get away with this here. They had been filling for 1,000 years with, shall we say, refuse matter. And Hercules' labor. Nice. Well, I did change that.
Okay.
Hercules' labor was to clean out the entire stables in one day, a process that he did by diverting 2 rivers right through the stables, and he succeeded, of course. But as you look through these various traditions and myths, they all seem to address themselves to a final cataclysm. And honestly, one of the most powerful and detailed is Revelations, and to a lesser extent, some of what's called for in Matthew 24. But these are all looking to the period of time that we now believe we're on the epic of, when Jesus says, this generation shall not pass away. He's obviously not talking about the generation that was listening to him at that time. I think that's pretty evident to everybody. He's talking about the continuity of consciousness that the age of Pisces has brought in, that initiated, and that we now stand at the other end of.
Powerful. This is, it's really important for people to sort of see the big picture, because I think that we could just get caught up in one particular part, and it's sort of a doom and gloom kind of scenario. And I think that there's ways to look at this so that it can be empowering.
With a brighter vision on the other side. The whole point of this is that the old stagnation, the old classifications are what are going down, and there's going to be a whole new awareness that is born out of this. On a much more focused piece, one of the last predictions I made for The Advocate, I'm still writing the same column, was that whoever was elected in 1992 would not finish office. And we are now seeing that 3 times through the course of the year I stated and restated that. And we now have a good idea of what that might be about.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. There's a lot of information about that. We're going to be coming now to a break, and we'll be coming back with our guests. We're going to continue the dialogue, and we will have our phone calls and call-in portion of this show, and we're going to have Don as well as Jacqueline, and I think that Janet had indicated that she might be interested also in being a part of this. I don't know how we're going to do this. I don't know if Versat is going to allow it, but I would love to have all of you be able to take phone calls. So we're going to sort of leave now.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Lobo, formerly of the Yukon Huskies and now a member of the American Cancer Society Relay for Life team in Connecticut. Relay for Life is a community-based event where teams of 10, families, friends, co-workers, gather to walk and raise money in remembrance of loved ones we have lost to cancer, and to fund the American Cancer Society's research, patient support, education, and advocacy programs. To find out how you can join this team to win the battle against cancer, call 1-800-492-7161.
Here's one time it doesn't matter who your neighbor is. Here's the other. Life's too short. Stop the hate.
Welcome back. We're going to continue our dialogue or conversation about the countdown to the next century. And I have Jacqueline and Don here, and we've been talking about various ways of looking at this kind of the changes that are happening throughout the world. And I want to, if I could, just sort of have you sort of talk about maybe how these changes might manifest on a personal level with people. How are they going to experience it in their life? What are some of the signs that will let people know there's something happening, there's something out there?
Well, I think Don talked about how with nationally and internationally where we saw borders collapse and whole new geographies occur in 1989 with the collapse of the Berlin Wall, that I think people are going to find in their personal lives also that the structures that they have perhaps held onto, and we're already seeing that in terms of job security.
Could it be families, marriages?
Right, all of this has happened, but particularly economically with job security, that is no longer a given in people's lives, that they can just take a job and have it be a safe vehicle to get them into retirement. That you can't count on that anymore. And that's one of those boundaries that has come down for folks now.
Okay, I think we have a call. Can I have, I don't know exactly. Hi.
Hello?
Hi.
Oh, good evening. How are you?
I'm sorry, I was waiting for something else to happen. Welcome to the Third Eye. How can I help you?
Yes, I'm calling in reference, you mentioned this is called the Third Eye.
Right.
Why is it that no one has mentioned that the Third Eye is after the ancient Maya and the Kemet? And also, I haven't heard anybody mention that how this has come from black people, African people. And I know you're familiar with Lloyd Strayhorn because all this comes from the motherland of Africa. I'll hang up and I'll listen.
I don't know if anyone would like to speak to that. One of the things that we're going to be doing on this show is to talk about the various cultural perspectives around the Third Eye. Tonight, our conversation is really from the perspective of the astrologers here. True, a lot of the astrology and a lot of metaphysical origins are in Africa. And one of the things that we plan to do on this show is to show the linkages of Africa to the Greeks, to the Romans, to all the other cultures, and so that people will have an awareness that it's all interrelated.
May I?
Sure, go right ahead.
Well, one of the things that I really brought in addressing that question was talking about the Old Kingdom of Egypt as the earliest tradition, which I referenced, and of course that is the African tradition. And certainly through Western tradition, that is the culture that came to influence the Greeks, the Romans, and then later on through Europe, and is the period that we have come to know. But the earliest focuses really go back to the period of Egypt. And yes, indeed, we've probably lost more in the way of esoteric wisdom that has come from Egypt than we now even know about. We are, in fact, this century rediscovering all the things that we know about the pyramids, what's in the Sphinx. It's just incredible what's opening up, and it does indeed stem from Africa.
Yes, yes. One of the things that I was very interested in doing on this show was to show the linkages to Africa and to the other cultures, because I really feel that through our I guess you could say we went through the evolution, we lost a lot in terms of the connections. And it was a we, they, and this culture is basically less than this culture. And I think that we're just not aware of the genesis of a lot of our thinking and where it's come from. So I appreciate the caller calling us and presenting that information. But we're not in any way going to forget the origins of a lot of this.
One of the other manifestations is that this last age that we're just coming out of, the age of Pisces, has basically, both through Buddhism more in the East and Christianity in the West, has been a whole philosophy that has focused on retreat from the material world. Well, what's been going on out in the material world as a result is a lack of humanity of one person to the other. It's as though the spiritual advisor, the master as it were, has let us do what we will, and we haven't, as shepherds, done a very good job in taking care of what's going on. And this is what is coming into reconciliation as we draw into this lifetime.
Exactly, exactly. I just feel that basically part of the Plutonian energy in Sagittarius is to really sort of get rid of all of this kind of demarcations around beliefs and show that it's all sort of connected together. So I think there is definitely a major shift that's happening.
One of the ways that's happening is in esoteric Christianity, there is a movement to bring in Sophia wisdom, which is really the wisdom of inclusiveness, and where that connection then is between all beliefs, where no one belief is better than the other. And I was interested in what Don said about in Hindu, with the Kali coming in, because there is another feminine energy of where we have to connect with chaos. And that's a part of the inclusiveness of feeling comfortable and centered when we are in chaos. And I think that's one of the gifts that astrologers can give to people through this whole transition, because it's not just in 1 year, or it's not just at the year 2000, but it's a long period of transition where spiritually we need to come into a greater sense of what is possible, and that we can't treat the earth the same way that we have. And so we also need a spiritual focus that will allow us that.
And if I may, I'd just like to address the year 2000. Society and consciousness right now has this awareness that there's something going on at a subliminal level. Something is about to happen. And you see this emanating in various ways. It began in the 60s and has continued throughout that time. My personal belief is that the year 2000 is simply what our collective conscious mind has seized upon in looking, well, something's coming, and you look at the years ahead, what is it? Well, it must be this. It's the turnover of the millennium. It's not the turnover of the millennium. And indeed, while it will be very closely rooted to that, it'll be actually probably 1 or 2 decades beyond the year 2000.
Okay.
So we're seeing a number of the changes sort of being put into place now, but this is part of a process that continues to build.
Okay.
One of the, I mentored with Ruth Gary, who was one of the founders of the Astrological Society, and one of the things she used to say, and this was back in the 80s, but she said the the end of the century, the end of the millennium would be like boiling maple sugar. All the scum would have to rise to the surface in order to get to the sweet sugar at the bottom.
My goodness, that's a really interesting kind of way of looking at it.
But I think that that's also what's happening, and it's not just the end of the century or the end of the millennium, but we really are going to have to be boiled a bit in order to have some scum rise to the surface in order to get to the sweet sugar of consciousness of what's possible for humanity.
Right. I'd like to say to the callers that we are taking calls at this time. And if you'd like to call the station, the number is 562-1898. I'd like to, if I could, since we're sitting here in New Haven, and I gave you the chart of the city of New Haven tonight, I'd like for you to just sort of talk about a little what you see could be some of the issues that are happening here, considering the fact that this is a city who's, okay, we got a phone call. Hi.
Hi. I wanted some information on the eclipse. Lately, it seems as if we're hearing so much about different kinds of eclipse. Is there something going on with the turn of the century? Why we're having so many eclipses? And what does that have any effect on human beings, or what's going on?
Okay. We can sort of speak to that. And I think that also New Haven, the eclipse may have easily affected New Haven in some ways because of the fact that the moon is in Pisces, and the eclipse that just recently took place last week was a solar eclipse of Pisces energy. Who would like to speak to that?
Well, I'll just do some technical, and then I'll pass some of the interpretation over, if I might. Eclipses happen at the same rate every year. You basically get two at each end of the year, and right now the seasons, I believe, are what, March and November, and that changes through the course of an 18-year period. However, when a solar eclipse, one happens to fall right in the path of the shadow of a solar eclipse, it's obviously much more dramatic. This last solar eclipse, the full path was far south of us. I believe it was through the northern part of South America and extended, of course, across the oceans. But it was partial in this area. It was at 6 degrees, 7 degrees, I guess, of Pisces, and I'll turn over some of the interpretation.
Oh dear. Well, I think it's just interesting. Astrologers like synchronicities, and here we are talking about the age of Pisces moving into the age of Aquarius. And we've had now in 1997, 1998, as we have these outer planets changing signs, we now have eclipses in the Pisces Virgo axis. And then we have another eclipse coming up in August that will be in the Aquarius Leo axis. So it's very timely for all of us that...
Well, you were talking about something on the esoteric plane.
Yes, I think Don is asking me to talk about that. I mentioned Sophia Wisdom, but one of the some of the information that I've been reading about in terms of Sophia Wisdom is the idea that the third coming of Christ actually came on an etheric level with this last solar eclipse, and it is connected also with the Mother Wisdom, or the Sophia Wisdom, where we really need to bring in again that part of all, or God, or the all-being, or however we want to call it, but that feminine or that yin quality.
So there's going to be a balance between male and female in terms of energy.
And
being
that
born.
Right, and that balance between, and actually Christ personified that balance. But we as humanity haven't done so well to create that balance. And it doesn't mean, I want to make sure that folks understand, it doesn't mean being a feminist. It means for all of us to balance that yin-yang within ourselves.
Okay.
There was one other element that they asked, do eclipses affect individuals? And the answer is yes, they do. This eclipse was at 7 degrees of Pisces. If you had anything in your chart at 7 degrees of Pisces, or indeed at any 7 degrees of any of the mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sag, or Pisces, then yes, this eclipse would affect you.
Don, we have a call. Hi, how are you?
Fine, how are you?
Good.
My question has to do with psychic ability and astrology. Do you feel that the studying of astrology helps with the psychic ability, or vice versa? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Of what
It makes
saying.
a lot of sense. I would say that basically, because I'm an individual who uses astrology and also intuitive divinations and other kinds of processes, I would say that they're very compatible, and they sort of work together. I think that once you start looking at astrology, you get an understanding of the energy that's inside of you and that's around you, and the energy you came into the universe with. And that can easily sort of expand your consciousness in terms of really tapping in to your intuitive self. So I really feel that studying astrology can be very helpful in identifying your strengths around that, and so that you'll be able to really cultivate it and work with it.
So you feel that people can study astrology to help themselves, not only just, I always thought of it as a tool that one would use to help others, which is what a true psychic does.
Yeah, I think personal awareness is a powerful kind of outcome from doing astrology.
I see.
You learn so much about yourself from it. I think that both of the astrologers can speak to that.
So what about knowing the exact time of birth? Because several people that I've talked with on the computer have said they cannot do readings because I don't know my exact time of birth.
Preferable. You can...
but it can be done, can't it?
It's much preferable to have the exact time of birth, but there's a method called rectification, where if somebody is aware of the day they were born, of course where they were born, you can, through sort of a backdoor method, take what's happened in your life and regraft it to the chart and figure out the time of birth. But rather than the astrologer telling you, although the astrologer can tell you a lot just knowing the day, then you tell the astrologer a whole chunk, and then they work with that and try to figure it out. Also, as far as the intuitive abilities were concerned, dreams communicate to us in symbolism. And astrology is really one of the final forms of symbolic sciences. So in looking back at these symbols, we're obviously working with very intuitive energies trying to put together their message.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you for calling.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. This is the Third Eye, and we're coming to the close of our first show. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to really have more time with my guests. I'm going to be inviting Jacqueline, as well as Don, as well as Janet, back to have more extensive conversation with them about astrology. In the next months ahead, though, we're going to be talking about a lot of different ways of looking at the third eye through a lot of different lenses. We will be also in the next month talking about the connection of energy to the third eye in terms of the body and in terms of the soul's development. So I look forward to having you come back and be with us next week or within the next month. And good night and safe journey into the third eye.